welcome you to the third in the series of Old Neighborhoods Ford. Before I introduce our interviewees and explain what the project was about, I'd like to introduce the mayor to everybody. And it looks like Ford's is here. Well represented.
Good afternoon. Coming today, this is, I really wish I could stay. I'm not from Ford's, but I grew up in Menlo Park Terrace right across the street. So we spent a lot of time in Ford's and all the different things. My mother actually still lives there. But this is a nice event. Brenda has done a tremendous job since taking over as the town historian. She has really energized the entire concept of Woodbridge history. For your information, we are closing in on the purchase of 86 Green Street, which will be our history museum. We are finally going to have a history museum. We've been looking at that building for quite a while. It got tangled up in legal issues. The firm that the woman had that was selling it to us, after about 9 months, decided they had a conflict and they could no longer represent her. But it was 9 months to realize they had a conflict, I don't know. Then it took her a few months to find another attorney. She finally did, and that building now is in the process of being sold to us. And then we'll get in there, we'll get an architect in and figure out what's got to be done. It needs a lot of work on the outside. Inside's pretty nice, very nice actually. Beautiful woodwork up and down all over. The outside needs quite a bit of work, probably a new roof, a lot of siding. The front porch is shot, so it'll take some time to turn it into the actual history museum that we can open up. But the fact is we're going to get it and have it there. So we are the oldest township in the state. We should have our own history museum. We're also working on, and Brenda's involved in the committee, on the 350th anniversary, which is 2019, 2 years from now. 1669 is when we were chartered, so the 350th anniversary will be in 2 years. So there is a committee being formed to work on that. So we've got a lot going on. With that, I do have to go. I have a whole bunch of stops this afternoon, but I hope you have an enjoyable time today. And once again, thanks to Brenda, thanks to the panelists. But really, Brenda's been doing a phenomenal job putting everything together for us these last several years. So thank you for that.
Good luck with that. You have to unwrap them. All right, good afternoon. This is the third in the series of Old Neighborhoods. This year, 2017, we're concentrating on Ford. Now, how many of you are from Ford's? That is the majority. Okay, of the whole group. All right, so we're going to learn about the interviewees I have here are Andy Nagy, to my far right, Karen Neary, and Dave Peterson, who used to live in Ford's, but now lives in Woodbridge. Okay, but it's still Woodbridge Township. They grew up. I started this project in 2008. I wanted to capture Woodbridge just before the population explosion of the 1960s. So I started interviewing people to capture different sections of Woodbridge, didn't have to be Woodbridge proper, throughout the township, who grew up when the population was maybe 40,000, not 100,000, when there were farms, such as the Durling farms, when there were mom and pop stores, before Woodbridge Center Mall. Because each of our neighborhoods, each of our 10 sections is unique. We are all part of Woodbridge. I've been a teacher, I was a teacher for 36 years, so I had an opinion of textbooks that they're boring. It's the people that are far more interesting, and their stories are far more, can capture what the United States went through, and Woodbridge was a microcosm. So you have your program, and you'll also see that while I started in 2008, I interviewed over 125 people throughout the township to capture this moment in time. How many of you have been interviewed? Just raise your hand. Yep, Bruce and Brian Small from Ford, the Ericksons, the Nagys, the Nearys, Dave Peterson, and I'm still going on. I still go on, but I wanted to share your stories with the rest of the community. So to my immediate left is Dave Peterson, and I asked them each to give me background information. and I had to squish it into about 2 sentences. So I have omitted a lot. Dave was born and raised in Fords. He was also involved in education, and he was one of the roles he held was as principal of Woodbridge High School,
93 to 96.
Okay. And he currently, he also was involved with the Woodbridge Alumni Association. He was the first president.
Right.
And it's now called the Township Athletic
Alumni Hall of Fame.
Hall of Fame. And to my immediate right, here we go with another teacher, is Karen Neary.
Yeah, but I got to be 41 years.
Okay. She was a teacher for 41 years, yeah, in Woodbridge Township. You also recognize Karen because of the various roles she's played in veterans organizations in Woodbridge throughout the state. And she's also initiated a project that many of you see throughout our main streets in Woodbridge. It's the Hero Hometown Banners.
Right.
And she initiated it, and she still coordinates it. So she can talk to you privately about it, or at the end, if you have questions, you can ask her about that. Andy, to my very far right, lives in Fords, but he grew up in Hope Lawn.
Correct.
Okay, and he was a graduate of Hope Lawn School, as well as the other Woodbridge school systems. He was also on our zoning board of adjustment for 14 years, served as a chairman, and he also was the chairman of the Heritage and Cemetery Committee at the First Press, which is just down the street a little ways. So these are our panelists. They've all been interviewed. You could look at their interviews on Google them or through Woodbridge Public Library. So the format is, I'm the moderator. I'll ask each questions. They'll each have a chance to respond. At the conclusion, there'll be questions and answers for you, but we do have to be out by 4 o'clock. And we do have light refreshments for all of you from Dorsey's Bakery that was supplied by the Historic Preservation Commission. So let's get started. Okay, the first question. Let's get to your families. Why did they settle in Fords or Hope Lawn? Dave, we're going to start with you.
Thank you, Brenda, first of all, for inviting me. It's an honor to be here today to share with everyone here, plus for somebody on TV, about growing up in what I call the little hamlet of Fords, as it was back in the late 40s and the 50s when I grew up there. And it's pretty hard for me to sit here now and talk the questions that you have. I could probably spend months and months and months to go about Fords, and there's people here in the audience that I personally know that would vouch for this. We could take months and maybe years talking about our childhood, but we'll try to keep it simple. But I think about my family settling, it's pretty difficult to talk about that without really mentioning my mom and dad, my grandparents. When I grew up in Fords, my mom and dad, my grandparents, we all lived together on William Street in Fords. And ironically, my mom grew up in Perth Amboy on a street called William Street. So she ends up having a house built in Fords on William Street, where Barry Berman's Fords Jewelers is currently located. But my mom and dad and my grandparents were such a big influence in our life. And I'd have to say in my neighborhood, a lot of grandparents lived with their siblings. That's just how it was at that time. And my mom and dad raised 4 children. My oldest brother was a graduate of Woodbridge High School, went on to play professional baseball with the Pittsburgh Pirates, and then had a career with the Pirates in many capacities, and as general manager won a World Series in '79, and finished his career as general manager of the New York Yankees. My other sister, Sarah Karvinchak, who lives in the same home that we all grew up with on 40 William Street, graduate of Woodbridge High School, served 39 years as a social studies teacher at Woodbridge High School and at Colonia Junior, and then became Colonia Middle School. My other sister, Linda Matruska, went to the University of Bridgeport and was the first dental hygienist in Middlesex County. But I'm claiming my parents and my grandparents had a tremendous influence, and none of us would have had the success we had without their guidance, sacrifice, and dedication. So I just wanted to enter that in. Now the question you asked about, how did they settle? I was talking to Karen Neary just prior to the start of the program. She says, I have no idea how my parents settled in Fords. Well, I had some insight listening to my brother, my sisters, and friends of my mother over the years. Found out that they grew up in Perth Amboy, my mom and dad, in the Bay City. And they saw that the city was going to become large. They loved it, but they said they wanted to bring up a family in a small rural community. And Fords was just that little tiny place at that time that was situated among Metuchen, Raritan Township, which is now called Edison, and Perth Amboy. So they wanted to get into a place that they could raise children in a real rural setting. And a lot of her friends said, look into Fords, part of Woodbridge Township. It's just developing. It's a great place to raise a family. Ultimately, they ended up there. The other story that I heard that brought back, there was a good friend of my mother's, the late Viola Fulton. There was a Fulton family, very prominent in Fords, and she was a good friend of my mom's. And she lived only about 2 spaces away from what was the Fords Playhouse Theater. And it was a beautiful home. I remember as a child going there, and backyard with grapevines, and it led all the way to the railroad tracks. It's now currently Matruska's Funeral Home on New Brunswick Avenue. And she influenced my mom, saying, Gladys, you want to end up raising a family, not in Amboy, because Amboy's great, but it's going to be a city atmosphere. Come into Fords. I live on New Brunswick Avenue. It's just the beginning. It's a great place to raise a family, and you'll enjoy it, and your whole family will as they grow up. And to this day, I look back at Fords as my original home, and I am so happy that my parents made that decision to raise all of us in the little hamlet, as I call it, of Fords. All right, that's basically where we ended up.
Thank you, but they moved from Perth Amboy. They made a choice to come.
Okay, Andy, you settled in Hope Lawn, but why did your parents come?
My grandparents were Hungarians, and they emigrated from Hungary to upstate New York. They were agrarian people, and they bought a dairy farm of about 200 acres, and they farmed the dairy farm as they did in Hungary. No electricity, no running water. It was strictly hand labor. Well, my parents, their children, I guess grew up on the farm, and farming is a tough business from sunset or from sunrise to sunset. So I guess they wanted to get away from the farm. My mother, of course, married my father. I was born in Norfolk, New York, the St. Lawrence Valley. It was called the Milk Shed of New York State, and so they wanted to get away. Well, my parents came down to Perth Amboy, New Jersey, and there was another Hungarian community called Little Budapest. And some of you may know that. It's still in Perth Amboy, right next to Route 440. And by now I'm 3 or 4 years old. I was born in 1935, and my parents decided to move to Hope Lawn, to a larger home. They moved to Hope Lawn, and by now I'm 4 years old, and my parents are getting settled in, and there were by now 4 children. I had 2 older sisters, a younger sister, and myself, and they're looking forward again to this larger home. And so we did. We moved there. We'd been living there about a month, and this was a rental situation. And the landlord asked them to move because he had another client with a different need of larger space. And so we moved next door. And next door was 2 rooms. It was a converted barbershop at 45 Howard Street. And so we moved in there, and the front room was the kitchen, the living room, the dining room, and the room toward the back was kind of a dormitory bedroom with 4 children, parents, and a very small bathroom with a water closet, a hand sink, and no tub. And so, nevertheless, my parents moved from upstate New York, a farming situation, down to Hopalong, New Jersey, looking for a better opportunity, and that's how we wound up in Hopalong.
Well, we're glad you did. Now, we're going to go to the baby boomer, the kid on the block up here.
Karen Neary?
I have no clue how my parents came to Ford's. I know my dad's family, the Neary family, he was born in Perth Amboy. I know my mom was born in Perth Amboy, near Perth Amboy Hospital, which is kind of ironic because later she would be a nurse at Perth Amboy, a.k.a. Raritan Bay Hospital. I know my mom they rented houses. The Cavallito family rented the big castle, we call it, across the street from the old Seven School. They rented in there. And then there was a house where the Ford's Firehouse is now. In between and how they got to Ford's, I have no idea. But when I was growing up, my grandma and grandpa Neary lived 2 houses away from me on Gordon Avenue. My grandpa Cavallito lived with us because my grandma had passed away when I was 3, I believe. And my parents built the house that I live in now, right next door to the one we previously lived in. So as I used to tell my kids in school, I came home from lunch for lunch one day and my parents moved. And so why they came to Ford's, I have no clue. But I know they were born in Perth Amboy.
Okay, so Perth Amboy seems to have been a common denominator, and then it was either Hopalong with Andy or Karen and Dave, their families moved directly to Ford's. We're going to get to the next question, and it's going to be different for all of you. What are some remarkable childhood experiences that you recall while growing up in Ford's? Andy, we're going to start with you this time.
Okay. As I had mentioned before, I was 4 years old, and I was underfoot, and my mother wanted to get me into school because my other 3 siblings were going to Hopalong School. Mary Fee was the principal, a wonderful woman who had a mark on many people's lives in Hopalong. So I started school at 4 years of age in Hopalong and went right into first grade. We were a deprived portion of the township. We didn't have kindergarten like my good wife here had in Woodbridge. But nevertheless, I went to school, and some of the major memories I had there was World War II. We're talking about the very early 1940s. And one of the things I remember was Raritan Arsenal was in full production at that time. And all of a sudden, there were loud explosions. And Miss Fee and the rest of the teachers got all of the students in Hopalong School, there were about 160 of us through the 8th grades, down into the basement of the school. And we sat on that floor for almost the entire day, listening to these thuds, booms, going off in Raritan Arsenal. Again, the early 40s. Someplace in the early 1940s, there was a natural catastrophe. We were in the yard, my sister and I, one day in the summer, and all of a sudden the sky was getting very, very dark. And out of the east, toward Perth Amboy, there is a underground reservoir on Florida Grove Road, and there was a tornado forming and coming toward Hopalong. And that tornado came from Perth Amboy. It hit that elevated reservoir, and it bounced over Howard Street and landed down at the end of Howard Street. It destroyed 2 houses and damaged 57 others, according to Ruth Wolk, who wrote a history of this occurrence. Another memory I have is one, again, of World War II. It was very strong, and I can remember it like it was yesterday. There was an honor roll of the World War II soldiers in Hopalong, and it was painted by one of the Fedor brothers on a plaque next to the firehouse in Hopalong. It was huge. It must have been 20 feet wide and maybe 25 feet tall. And the first U.S. soldier from Hopalong was killed and became the first Gold Star soldier. His name was Kenneth Johnson. And Miss Fee got all of us from Hopalong School on one particular day, formed us up in parade march, and we marched down to the firehouse to honor this soldier. I remember Albert T-Back was carrying the American flag. And there were speakers, there were prayers said, there was singing of patriotic songs. It's something that I will never forget. I also wanted to mention that right after this tornado that had happened sometime before, I had a little sister, her name was Esther, and polio was a scourge at that particular time in the summer. And she contracted polio, and she died within a couple of days after that tornado had occurred in Hope Lawn. And those are some of the strongest memories I had of that particular time in Hope Lawn.
Okay, so we not only got you from Perth Amboy,
We got
but
a
we
tornado.
got the tornado. And that was in 1941.
42, yes.
Okay, all right. Okay, we're going to go to the baby boomer now. Andy mentioned World War II, and Dave will probably mention World War II because they were both aware. You're the baby boomer, 46, 47? 47, okay. Your personal memories of childhood experiences.
Well, Ford's was always, it was kind of small, I guess, growing up, when I was growing up. I'm in what they call Old Ford's. I'm not in Menlo Park or Lafayette Estates. I remember going to Ford's Park, walking to Ford's Park, and there used to be a little midget racetrack in Ford's Park, where the tennis courts or the hockey courts are now. And I remember going over there on a Sunday afternoon with my parents and watching these race cars, these go-karts go around. And this was my dream. I was going to be a race car driver. So there was an Exxon station over by, across the street kind of from 7th School. Esso, I guess it was back then. And Jay was the guy's name. I can't remember his last name. He sold those cars, so my father bought me a car. And it was black, and it was going to have a red number 7 because my birthday is January 7th, and it was going to be Karen's Special. Till we got home and told my mother, and that was the end of my racing career.
Very short-lived.
But I also remember where Home Depot is right now was a horse auction. And an auction, I think there used to be tables and things there of junk, but I was more concerned about the horses. And my dad was a firefighter in Ford's, and he always had a part-time job, building houses, delivering mail, delivering oil, driving funeral cars, but he always had a part-time job when he wasn't working at the firehouse. And I guess he did some stuff at the auction. And to repay him, he said, "You let me have a horse." It was a quarter horse, so I had a horse, and we would walk over there on his day off, and he would put me on, and I was Dale Evans, and he would walk me all over Ford's on my horse while I was fighting the bad guys. But that was where Home Depot is today. And where Sims was, or is, or was, because it's empty now, that was the first Two Guys. And Two Guys went across the highway where Walmart is now. It moved over there. We used to go downtown because the firehouse at that time was on Coriel Street. And there was an A&P on the corner, and Katz's drugstore was on the other corner. And of course, Ford's Theater, going to Ford's Theater on a Saturday afternoon and throwing popcorn at the screen, and Mr. Lang saying, "Out of my movie house, out of my movie house." We must have got thrown out of the movie house 10,000 times. So, and I remember my mother sending me and my cousin Ron to Ford's Movies with 50 cents on a Saturday to go see The Wizard of Oz. My friend Janet's going to laugh about this now, because once the witches started doing whatever they did and the monkey started flying, I said, "Hey, Ron, you like this movie?" He says, "No, Carrie, this is scary." I said, "Let's get out of here. We'll go play on the chicken coops over where Quick Check is now, and when we see everybody coming out of the movie, we'll go home." And I have never seen The Wizard of Oz.
Okay, we're going to leave on that note with the flying monkeys.
No one gets to see the wizard.
Okay, Dave, what were some of your childhood experiences that stand out in your mind?
Sure. First, forgive me, my allergies are killing me today, so I'm drinking water. But my former administrator comes out at me. I have my bullet points, so I'm just going to rattle them off fast. Number one, I grew up on William Street in Ford's section of Ford's. And on that corner right now is Barry Berman's Ford's Jewelers. That was an empty lot. And there was a billboard up there at one time. And I remember crossing that lot and many times and told my mom, I'm going up Ford's. Up Ford's was, you went 2 blocks up before you saw your first store. It was Berkowitz's Food Market that we dealt with. And that sign that was up there, billboards that were there, every one of us as kids used to love it when the month changed and the people would come and they'd put it up. They had a long pole and they put up there, it was either a cigarette commercial with an athlete or it was a Miss Rheingold commercial for a beer at that time. And it was intriguing to see that. And that was one of the interesting things that we watched. And we'd end up climbing that structure. We'd go up 30 feet in the back. We'd be climbing up and down in that, much to the chagrin, I'm sure, of my parents. But that remarkable things, our neighbors. I would say the neighborhood, those folks in our neighborhood, they looked after you just like your parents. You did something wrong, you got it just as well as your parents would. That's just the way it was when we grew up. Your neighbors were like your second parents. Our recreation was primarily William Street or Paul Street or Hornsby Street. All the kids, we played on the street. We played all kinds of games, handball, hide and seek, you name it. We drank out of people's garden hoses. We thought nothing of it. We could drink, turning the spigot on, drink it, and we all survived. But I would say the street was primarily where we ended up playing. Most people in those days, we didn't go on vacations. I think we made 2 trips to Asbury Park, my parents, one in the beginning of the summer and one towards the end. That's just the way it was at that time. Our recreation, we played at a place called Hoy's Field on Hoy Avenue, which is now, I think, a lawyer's office, a professional building. We played there. Ford's Park, as Karen mentioned, I hung out there so many times that we played ball up at Ford's Park. We were so busy at times that when there were leagues, and Bob Benny is here now, he can attest to this. He played for Flynn and Son, I played for the Bobcats, it was the baseball team. We had to get permits to go up there to practice, and we had to wait 2 hours when one got done, and then we'd get our turn to practice. It was just a busy place that we just hung out. So we had Hoy's Field, we had Ford's Park. Another place that we hung out quite a bit was the Ford's Recreation Center, which is no longer. It's on New Brunswick Avenue. It was a bowling alley. They had 12 alleys. And I wanted to become a pin boy. And in those days, pin boys, you sat back there and you had a lever. You pushed it down, the pins came up, and you put the 10 pins down, and then you hid the best you could when somebody threw the ball down and you get hit with one of those pins. My mother wouldn't let me do that, but I watched so many times the people that were pin boys that were there. And I think they got like 25 cents an hour, and had to worry about really injury with those pins flying and hitting you. So we had the Ford's Recreation Center. Karen mentioned the Ford's Playhouse. It was actually called the Ford's Playhouse Theater, and Gazel Lang, the gentleman here was talking about, and Mr. White were the owners. Oh, God bless them. I'll tell you, we drove them crazy. We crawled under the seats. I think we did everything but watch the movies when we went there. It was 25 cents to get in. And my parents probably said, good riddance to get rid of all. It was for Saturday and Sunday. They had different shows, and it was 6 cents. My parents gave me a nickel and a penny. You could get good and plenty, you could get anything. We always got good and plenty because we'd share them. You got so much of it. But it was 25 cents to get into the movie. So that was a big place that we hung around, the Ford's Playhouse. The going up Ford's, I used to say to my mom, or with my friends, well, Mom, going up Ford's. And what was Ford's like? And there's people sitting here that probably remember it, and as I mentioned, I opened up, I could probably talk for months or years about Ford's, but some of the places that we hung around at Ford's, there was Ferbel's. It was a little confectionery store. Claire Ferbel ended up was a teacher of business department at Woodbridge High School. Then we had a young couple bought a place called K-Bert's. Her name was Kay and his name was Bert, so it was K-Bert's. It lasted about 4 years. We'd go in there, and they had a jukebox. You tell a kid today, what's a jukebox? They wouldn't even know what you're talking about. But we'd end up dancing, we'd have soda pop, all innocent stuff. There was Katz's Drugstore that Karen mentioned. It was Puhan's Drugstore. There were 3 hardware stores in Ford's. They all made a living. There was Thompson's Hardware. That was right on the corner of Hoy Avenue and Brunswick Avenue. You had Lipinski's on the Brunswick Avenue. You had Rosenblum's. And they all made a substantial living. So we hung it all out at all this place. Mardiak's was the place down by the monument on King George's Road. So there are places basically that we did hang around. And we had a lot of fun. And it was in an innocent time period. And there's some of the things that I remember vividly about Ford's, but I could spend hours here talking about some of the little detailed things that we did as children growing up in that small little town of Ford's.
Well, I thank you. But if you notice, the 2 who grew up in Ford's, that streetscape you knew the stores.
Well, you know, you were mentioning Ford's Park, but there was one other thing about Ford's Park. You weren't allowed to go in Dunham's Pond, or by Dunham's Pond, because people drowned in there.
Yeah.
And
we did
also
anyway.
Metzger's on New Brunswick Avenue. It was
Right.
like a general store, and they lived upstairs, and all I remember is the creaking floor.
Okay, now, Andy grew up in that deprived section of Hope Lawn, which he called deprived.
Because you didn't have kindergarten. But there's also something else that, Dave, you mentioned, and it was in your interview, and it struck me. How did you celebrate Thanksgiving? Do you remember what you mentioned in your interview with the hunting on Thanksgiving?
Well, yeah, I was going to bring that up a little later on.
Oh, okay.
So if you could just wait a second,
Sure.
so I don't want to deprive anyone else. But yeah, I'll bring that up. That was
Okay.
very interesting.
Because it's a unique experience for Thanksgiving. All right, going to the third question. During the 1930s to 50s, what would you consider the focal point, the dominant feature of growing up where you did? Karen, we're going to...
Well, I guess for me, the focal point was going down to New Brunswick Avenue, because my mom, we would bring Dad his supper every night down to the firehouse. I know firemen are supposed to cook. My father boiled and burned water. But, so no, he did not cook. He was one of 5 boys. But we used to bring his supper down to the firehouse if he was working the 3 to 11 shift. And then if we were at the firehouse, we would go to Metzger's, we would go to Katz's, we would walk New Brunswick Avenue. And that's kind of what I remember. And then going to Ford's Park on a daily walk with my grandpa Cavalito to pick mushrooms. And we didn't die. He knew what mushrooms to pick. And, you know, riding bikes and playing on the street. That's pretty much what I remember. Some of my past schoolmates are in the audience here, and it was nice to hook up with them again. And we were just reminiscing. We actually walked to the bus stop. And you had to walk home from the bus stop. And the bus didn't drop you at your front door. And we walked to school. I walked to 7th school every day. And there was a possibility when Ford's Junior High opened, yeah, that's what it was called back then, that we would have to walk. I lived on, and I still live on Gordon Avenue, which is right near the Liberty Tavern. And we would have to walk to Ford's Junior High. And you know what our parents' answer was? You're going to have to get up a half an hour earlier. Now there would be chaos that we would not even be able to control if that happened today. So, you know, I just remember that we all kind of hung together. Everybody knew everybody. My friend Donna back there and Susie and I went to church together. Donna and I grew up together. Our dads were in the St. John's First Aid Squad. Was your dad in the firehouse too?
No, just St. John's.
Just St. John's. But, you know, we grew up together and our families were friends. And, you know, you got together at those activities at the St. John's First Aid Squad or the firehouse. But that's kind of what I remember, and playing on the fire truck when we brought Daddy his supper. You know, I'd climb up on top of the truck and do who knows what. I don't know.
But it was a great experience.
It was fun. And when he wasn't walking me all over town with my horse. But
That was unique. But you could do it back
we have
then.
pictures of me on that horse with poor Daddy. Here's his day off, and he's walking me all over Fords.
Okay. Andy, we're going to go to you.
Yes. Again, this period of time, the 30s and the 40s in Hope Lawn, the focal point of the entire community was Hope Lawn School, school number 10. Again, Mary Fee was principal, and she was the cheerleader for the community. We're talking about programs that were put on by the teachers, Marion Gillette, Teresa Mascarelli, Mrs. Brown, Miss Hinkle, and there were programs of choral presentations that they would put on in the evening for the parents of the children. And we also had variety shows come into the community. We'd have singers and dancers and magicians, and I think it cost 10 cents to get into the program. And they were wonderful times because most of the children's parents came out to see all of these programs. A big thing that happened in Hope Lawn when I got into like maybe 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade was a program called Recreation, Friday Night Recreation. And Woodbridge Township started to open the public schools in the evening. They'd have adult chaperones. Half of the auditorium was sectioned off for volleyball. There was a jukebox that you played for free. Someone made frankfurters, and you could buy a frankfurter and some soda pop. And it was a godsend for the young people of Hope Lawn. I just wanted to mention on Mr. Peterson's comment about his going to the Ford's Theater for 25 cents. When we went to the theater, it was 10 cents. 10 cents, so that shows you how time passes.
Inflation.
Yeah.
And so,
Just a few years.
again, Hope Lawn School, the public school was the focal point of our lives in Hope Lawn. And the other thing was the empty lots. There was no public park in Hope Lawn, and we formed our own sandlot baseball teams. And Mr. Peterson mentioned baseball before about his brother. And we formed a team called the Hope Lawn Indians. And the only uniform we had was a hat with an H on it. And so that was the Hope Lawn Indians. And we had a terrific time playing sandlot ball in Hope Lawn. So thanks for letting me share that.
Well, thank you, because the school system, Hope Lawn, which is no longer a
Public
school, it's a church.
Yes.
This was the focal point for people living in Hope Lawn.
Right.
Especially since you didn't have a park.
Terrific.
But also in the schools on Friday nights, I remember, we used to have dances. Remember, we used to go to the dances at 7 school. I guess all the schools did, I don't know, but since I went to 7 school, we used to go over to 7 school. And, you know, I don't remember how long they last, maybe till 10 o'clock, and mom chaperoned, and I think there were refreshments. But, you know, girls, you spend too much time running in and out of the bathroom. Ask him to dance with me. Okay, I will. Let's go in the bathroom. Okay, let's go. The girls are on one side, the boys are on the other side. But it was fun. They were fun times.
Okay, and once again, the school system. And Dave, getting to question 3, what would you consider the focal point of your life growing up in Fords?
Well, there's several, and I'm going back to my bullet points again. But definitely, as far as I'm concerned, it was the family structure when I grew up. My mom and dad, my dad was one tough cookie, God rest his soul. We had chores to do around the house. I was taking the garbage out, and I was cutting the grass. I was doing everything. And my sisters had responsibilities. My older brother did. And by the way, there was no such thing as an allowance. My father would say, get out and you do it. You bring it in. That was the bottom line. And my allowance was, if you were good enough, you went to the Ford's Playhouse Theater on Saturday and Sunday for 25 cents. So definitely it was the family structure as far as I was concerned. The neighborhood probably came in a close second. Everybody was very friendly, intimate with one another. I have one thing that I didn't have written down here, but I have to share with everyone. I found it very funny. My mom and dad there were trucks that came around, milk trucks in those days, the Bond truck, the Dugan guy. And I can remember as a kid, my mother and father knew both the guy that delivered the Dugan's coffee cake and Happy, I can't think of his name, Happy Martin. He was the Bond guy. And I remember one time as a kid, we lived upstairs and my grandparents lived downstairs. And they both came at the same time, and they had the uniform on. They had the big thing that take order sheet in the pants. And they came upstairs, and the Dugan guy had the crumb cake, and the Happy Martin had rolls. So they came at the same time because they knew each other. My mother had coffee perk, and it was a coffee percolator then. It percolated, and they were sitting down at the table, and here they were sitting in their outfits, and my mother was serving them coffee, and we were eating the stuff that they just delivered. We were always, it was so funny, but that was typical of what went on with that. But that was just something that was funny. But I mentioned Ford's Park. Karen Neary mentioned that. Ford's Park was so rural and it was so beautiful. It still is to this day. I mean, the township has done a wonderful job in taking care of it. But that was such an integral part of our lives going up to Ford's Park. And I remember at one of these previous events, Frank Capraro, Brenda asked about how did you get places? And he said, well, mostly it was shoe leather. And I said it was sneaker leather in our case, or by bike. We rode all over the place. But Ford's Park was the good old place that we had a lot of fun. Going back to Andy Nagy's just talking about school number 10. If anybody asked me probably the place that brought us all together was good old number 7 school. Karen Neary mentioned it. It was a corner of King George Road and Hoy Avenue. It's now a professional building, that red brick building. Every time I go by it, it's still Ford 7 school. The tree in the front is there. It's over 70 years old. But we met lifetime friends there. There's people I saw them on Facebook, I contact all the time. Mr. Howard Sharp was the principal. He was about 6'2". He lived on Crow's Mill Road. He was one tough cookie. He scared you just by looking at him. He never smiled. And I got friendly with a few teachers that I had when I was a young kid, and I had them over my house for dinner. Now, I don't know how true this is, but every 6 weeks, he used to have a Mr. Sharp's test. It's every 6 weeks. And he would come in, I remember, imposing figure, 6'2", and he'd have them all wrapped up in a rubber band. He'd hand them to the teacher. And some of the teachers I had over, later on, we were talking about that, and they'd say, you know, David, I just want you to know something, that when Mr. Sharp brought those tests in, we had no idea what was on that. That was his way of checking to see if we were following the curriculum. So even back in those days, we're talking about the late 40s, early 50s, there wasn't a true testing program, but it was Mr. Sharp's way of taking a look to see whether they were following the curriculum or not. And it was Mr. Sharp's 6 weeks test. And he was a tough cookie.
And nobody from the parents called up to complain?
No one complained about that. But 7 school was the place that pretty much, that was the melting pot that we all met. We played there, relationships developed, and to this day, I'm still friendly with people that I went to 7 school with. And one thing, I don't know that Karen mentioned it, 7 school was K to 8, and you were promoted to high school. But 7 school did not have 5th grade. For 5th grade, you had to go to 14 school. And, you know, now mom and dad, because of circumstances, I guess, what's going on in society, take them in cars. We went over there, and I went to 5th grade. I had Mrs. Balderston. Every time I go up 40th Avenue and I look at that room, I can still see it going there. And right across the street, there was a little Anderson's confectionery store. And twice a week, my mother would give us a couple of, maybe $1 if it was that. And that went a long way, a long time ago. We'd go in there, and all of us, and we'd have a couple of hot dogs and maybe a soda, and then go back over. And we went 1 year there to 5th grade, and then we went back for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. It was departmentalized at that point. And then we were promoted to Woodbridge High School. But 7 school was definitely one of the focal points that brought us all together. And to this day, when I go by there and I look at it, it's always number 7 school, that little red brick building. And I had an interesting experience too, Brenda, that I think I would share with everyone, that when I went there, I had teachers like Mrs. Lockey, Mrs. Harding, and when I left teaching physical education to become an administrator, it was recommended by Dr. Bonacore, who was Assistant Superintendent for Personnel then, get a little experience in the classroom. So I went to what was Newark State College, now it's Kane University, took courses to teach. I ended up going back and I taught at 7 school. And that was the thrill. I ended up teaching 6th grade in Marjorie Lockey's classroom. And I remember her teaching, as I was discussing with some of the folks back here, that taught you how to structure a sentence properly, how to write a friendly letter, a business letter. And it gave me such a thrill to go into that same building that I attended as a student and was in a classroom with some really hard, dedicated teachers. And here I was now teaching in that classroom, and I stayed there for like 1.5 years before I was appointed athletic director, department chair at Colonia High School back in 1971. So that's just that was the focal point of our lives.
Thank you. What's impressed me with all 3 of you is you were able to remember teachers' names.
Yeah.
And this is like over 50 years ago.
Yes, at least.
You've got phenomenal memories.
I guess there's a plus to being the youngest, because I did go to 5th grade in 7 school. And my teacher was Mrs. Edwards. And I only went to 6th grade in 7 school, because then we graduated and went to Barron Avenue School for 7th and half of 8th grade until Ford's Junior High was built. And we were just talking about that before. On a January Friday, we were told, bring all of your books home and go to your bus stop, because you're going to the new school on Monday, and you're going from half day to full day. And guess what? We're still here to talk about it.
Okay, now, Andy, you strictly went through Woodbridge, Barron Avenue, right?
Graduated from Hope Lawn School number 10, 8th grade.
Okay.
And then went to Barron Avenue High School and graduated from Barron Avenue High School in 1952.
You were age 16, right?
I was 16 years old, yes.
But you skipped kindergarten because you were in the...
I did not go to kindergarten. We were deprived.
You were in the deprived area. All right, now, you were on split sessions.
Went on split sessions. The freshmen and the sophomores went in the afternoon, and the seniors and the juniors went in the morning. And that gave a good opportunity for the juniors and seniors to get a part-time job during the afternoon, which many of us did.
Okay, and Dave, were you on split session too?
Yes, what is now currently Woodbridge Middle School. I went there for 3 years, and as a freshman and sophomore, you went in the afternoon, and then when you became a junior or a senior, you went in the morning from like 7:10 to maybe 12:10, 12:15. But I went there for 3 years, and then I was the first graduating class out of the current Woodbridge High School, the 56-57 school year.
Okay, so you're a graduate of Woodbridge High School 57 then?
Correct.
Okay.
And I'm the last graduate out of Woodbridge High School when it was the Township High School. Because the year after I graduated 64, and after that, JFK opened. And at that time, somewhere along the way, some people from Ford's ended up graduating from JFK. So my whole family went to Woodbridge High except for my cousin Ronnie. He ended up in that other school, that green and white one.
You don't mention that one. Okay, let's go down to question 4. What is the biggest change that you have witnessed in Ford's
Or Hope Lawn, or both,
for you, Andy?
during your entire life?
I got married.
That was a positive. She's here, Shirley.
Okay,
Other than that,
I think one of the biggest changes was shopping. The mom and pop stores, which upheld the community during those World War II years, started to close because of the rise of the AMP, the ShopRite, and all of the big grocery stores. There were 4 mom and pop stores in Hope Lawn. There was Gut Wines right near school number 10. And then there was Big Joe Bagdy on May Street. He had the largest mom and pop store in Hope Lawn. And then there was the Hungarian family Fedor's had a store, I think it was Loretta Street, and right across the street was Such's. Now
There was
those...
a hat store too, wasn't there?
Who?
Pinelli's Hats?
Pinelli's Hats was across the street in Perth Amboy, the other side of Florida Grove Road. Florida Grove Road was the dividing line between Hope Lawn and Perth Amboy. And closing of those stores, and then other things happened. All of those empty lots after World War II started to go away because the homecoming servicemen started to buy homes that were being built on these empty lots, so the sand lots started to go away. And also at that time, the New Jersey Turnpike came and it cut right through Hope Lawn. A number of years later, the Garden State Parkway came and cut through Hope Lawn. And at the same time, as the economy got better, more money started to change hands. People bought more autos, and so traffic became a thing. And so I saw a great explosion of automobiles during that period of time. And my favorite car, my first real car, was a 1947 Plymouth Club Coupe, and it was the one that I squired Shirley around in. We had a great time.
Okay. Dave?
Yeah, the biggest change I think I saw in Ford's, and it's not a negative thing, it's when I grew up in Ford's in the late 40s and the 50s, it was a very small, intimate, rural community. And as Mr. Nagy mentioned and Karen did, there were empty lots that we played on. There was all over. It was extremely rural. I mean, didn't have what they have today. Now it's grown, and it's not a negative comment. It's just that every lot is filled. There's a home on it, or there's a business on it, and it's become more, I don't want to say city-like, but it has grown out of that real rural context that I grew up with as a child. And I'm not saying from a negative standpoint, because it's still a great place to live and raise a family. My sister, in fact, lives on 40 William Street, the same house that we all grew up in when we were youngsters. A couple of things that are interesting that were brought up here by Karen and also by Andy that I have to mention about changes, and not only in Ford, but it was in Woodbridge Township, and it probably was in New Jersey, but no stores were open on Sunday. I remember my mother saying, Dave, you got to run over to Berkowitz's and get milk and get this, that, and run over there now because tomorrow the stores are closed. The gas stations were closed. I mean, you didn't get anything on a Saturday. You were out of luck until Monday. So that was a big change.
Except for the bakeries, right?
Maybe the bakeries. Yes, the bakeries. There was Eisner's Bakery across from Lady at Peace Church. Right? They made the money on Sundays. You're absolutely correct. And Andy mentioned about the change with the mom and pop stores like Berkowitz, where I dealt with, and it was Sisolak's and Ford's. There was Wagon Hoppers. There were all kinds of stores that we went to. But the biggest thing that I found kind of depressing as a child, and I learned this through my parents, where currently Sipperstein's is on the Brunswick Avenue. That was the original Acme supermarket, and I worked there part-time when I was in high school. And I can remember Mr. Berkowitz, when that market opened up, I could still see him looking out and down the street, because they just dealt with such volume, and people were coming there from Woodbridge, they were coming from all over the place, and that was sort of like the beginning of the end of the mom and pop stores, the big supermarkets that started to take place. And then I think coming in here and talking about the Erickson family are sitting here, some of them. And I remember going to Berkowitz, and I remember Durling Farms. I mean, going up on Main Street was like a cow pasture, and you go up where the Methodist Church is, there was Durling Farms.
It
What?
wasn't Darling.
Wasn't it Durling Farms?
No, it was Green Hill Dairy.
Green Hills Dairy?
And we delivered milk purchase for Darling Farms.
Oh, is that what it was?
After World War II.
I stand corrected. It's good. But I remember them coming in delivering the Berkowitz, and I can still see the cows in the back, and the garage, the structure is still there in the back where the barns.
All in there.
Yes, I remember that very well, seeing the cows grazing up there. So that was something that was very interesting. Now, Brenda mentioned, and I want to move along quickly because I know we're on a time frame, two things that I found very interesting growing up in Ford's as a child. When you had your refuge picked up, you had cans you bought at the hardware stores, Lipinski's or Thompson's or Rosenblum's. Or if you were lucky enough, some people worked for refineries, you got an empty drum and you drilled holes and you put handles on it. And they were put outside. And now we look at the refuge pickup you have, whether it be recycling or with your regular refuge in the green can, the 95-gallon. Gentleman comes along, most of them have been men that I've seen anyway in my area off Barron Avenue, and they come with the truck, they put the ladder, hook, they lift it up, dump it in, and it's it. And when I grew up in Ford's, I remember a bunch of us kids, and when the people would come around, sanitation people would come around, they came in a big dump truck. And I can picture this like it was yesterday. Big dump truck, and they had the driver who would drive down William Street, it was a dead-end street, and it ended up with, there were two other men, and there was a guy up at the top, and he had hip boots on. They were like waiters. They're waiters. And they took the cans, and they handed them up to him. And if it was heavy, they handed it up to him. And the guy would empty it. He'd stand in among all that stuff, and they'd put the can back down. And the dump at that point was actually down Crow's Mill Road, past where Delina's was, and you went over the bridge past St. Stephen's Cemetery. You hooked a right where Crossroads apartments are, and where 287 is. That was the garbage dump. That was you could see them dumping all the garbage. Then they'd go back again. The man stood up top and took all that, emptied the cans, and handed them down to the two gentlemen, and they put them back down again. That was something that stood out in my mind that changed where we are today. The other one, Brenda mentioned about in my interview about hunting. Hunting was in Woodbridge Township. When I was a kid at Woodbridge High School, and when I started as a junior going in the afternoon, if I came home, I didn't have a lot of homework, and it was like November and December, and we hunted rabbits and pheasants. And people hunted all over. And I can remember hunting William Street, Paul Street, Ling Street, Hornsby Street. They were all dead-end streets, led down to what we call the tracks. Now it's all green acres through the freeholders. And there were woods down there were fields, and we hunted rabbits and pheasants. But I remember one Thanksgiving day, the late Cliffy Freese, who graduated in 1958, was really a great football player and a good friend. His brother worked at Sears Roebuck, and they made a shotgun called J.C. Higgins. And I had a Savage shotgun, a single gauge that my brother bought for me for $18.95. And I remember meeting Cliffy at the corner of Paul Street, and we, on a Thanksgiving morning, my mom said to me, you just make sure you're home by 1 o'clock, because we're going to be eating by 2:30. And we had our shotguns thrown over our shoulder, broken, empty, of course. We had boots on, and we had a couple pieces of rope with us. And what we did, I met Cliffy Freese. We walked up New Brunswick Avenue, up to Ford Avenue, walked all the way up Ford Avenue, got by 14th School, crossed over, went over the Turnpike Bridge. And when you got over the Turnpike Bridge, to the right now where those apartments are, that was all woods and fields, all the way down to Kensington Garden Apartments, those of you who are familiar with Fords. We'd hunt all the way down to that end, and then we'd cross over where I guess there's McLuhan's, a restaurant now, and that was an A&P. But we'd hunt all the way back up, except there was a place called Barrady's Grove, where there were a lot of picnics and social events that took place. We'd bypass that. We'd swing out, empty our guns, come back on Fort Avenue, come north of that a little bit, go back in the woods or fields, hunt all the way up to about what's now Murdoch Street. And when we got finished, we'd break our guns, take the shells out, and if we had a few rabbits, whatever, we had them tied to a piece of rope, threw them over our shoulders, broke the gun up, walked down Fort Avenue, all the way down to New Brunswick Avenue, walk back. Cliffy Feast would go down Paul Street, and I'd walk back to William Street with the shotguns overhead. Nobody would say a word, but there was hunting throughout the township.
And did you make it home in time for Thanksgiving?
Made it home in time. You better
Okay.
believe it, or my father would have raised the roof, no doubt about it.
Okay, Karen, you're the baby boomer again, you're the youngest, so I don't know if your memories sort of coincide or a little different?
Well, I was born and raised on the same street. My grandmother lived a house away. There was an empty lot in between. The house was moved there when they built the turnpike and the parkway. I can remember going down the end of Woodland Avenue on evenings. All of us went. I think my mom and dad, the whole neighborhood went, and we sat on blankets watching them pour the concrete. It's like, wow, you people need to find the life. But, we'd run around and play and watch them pour concrete at night. But, and everybody knew the whole neighborhood was like family. And there's a duplex house on the corner of my street. It's the only duplex house in that part of Ford's. It was moved from Coin Street when they built the parkway. But as I said, my dad was a fireman. My mom was a nurse at Perth Amboy. And my grandpa Cavalito lived with us. But there'd be days when they both worked the same shift, and 7 to 3, for example, and I had to go to school. But Grandpa, I'd be up, and Mom would give me breakfast. Probably I was up early, I don't remember, but I had to go across the street to the neighbor's house, to Mrs. Turbish's house. And she would make sure that my hair was combed properly, and I had to pick out my clothes the night before and, make sure I was dressed, and you walked to school. And, growing up, there were birthdays and there were holidays when Dad wasn't around. Sometimes Mom wasn't around, depending on their shift. But, I can't ever remember a time when I felt neglected because of that. I was very proud of the work that they did and what they did. And I remember them not being home for days after the train wreck.
In 1951.
I was small at that point. I remember we were washing clothes, and my mom got a call from my dad at the firehouse, and I guess he told her, and she said, I have to get dressed. My big job growing up was I had to starch her nurse's cap and press it out on the side of the stove in raw starch. And she had to get dressed and go. She was a Red Cross nurse also. She told me she had to park down by it used to be the Brass Bucket. I don't know what it is now. It's a kidney center, I think.
Yeah, it's a dialysis.
And walk up to Pearl Street where the train wreck was. But that's what I remember. I remember the neighbors. Your neighbors were like your family. And everybody had a key to everybody's house. And everybody knew what was normal routine. And, it's changed in the sense that my neighborhood hasn't changed that much, but the people living in it have changed. And I don't know if the change is always for the better. But, there are still some neighbors that are still old-time neighbors, and we're still close to them. But that's the biggest change that I see, because, where I live in Old Fords, there wasn't too much space for things to be added to. But that's about it. And again, the mom-and-pop stores that aren't there anymore, and I wish those hardware stores were, because now you can only buy what they stock. So if you need a screw this long, too bad for you, because they only carry them this long. But I could go to the old Ford's Hardware and get whatever you needed. Bring in the old piece and get the new piece.
Unfortunately, those days
Those days are over.
are over.
It's called progress.
And but all of you mentioned the turnpike or the parkway. You muted the pouring of the concrete, but it did have an impact on Hope Lawn or Ford's. And I'm glad you mentioned your parents, because I think your parents, with their civic commitment, has continued with your lives as well. Now, you are still living in Woodbridge. Why have you remained in Woodbridge? Karen, we'll start with you.
I don't know. I have looked. My aunt was born and raised in Woodbridge. She was a cheerleader at Woodbridge High School. She was a nurse also at Raritan Bay. And recently, well, I guess about 10 years now after my uncle passed away, she moved down to Greenbrier Woodlands in Toms River. It's a neat community. We go down all the time and hang out at the pool. And I came that close to buying a house down there. But then I decided this is home. But I don't know. You know, why do I stay here? It's home. It's a place I'm familiar. We're close to everything. If we decide to go to the city, you go to the train, you're in the city in 40 minutes. Decide to go to D.C., go to Metro Park, you're in D.C. in 3 hours. You want to go to Jersey City and see the Statue of Liberty, you're there in 40 minutes, or 35 the way I drive. You want to go to Atlantic City, you can go to Atlantic City. You want to go to the shore, you can go to the shore. You want to go to the mountains, you can go to the mountains. But, you know, so that's why I'm still here, I guess, because it's home. It's still what I'm familiar with.
Well, then we're lucky, because we also have the hero, hometown hero.
We have our hometown heroes.
Okay.
And I hope my dad and mom are proud, and I hope I've done them well. I always say I'm proud of who they were and what I am because of them.
Thank you. Andy? Because you have a son that doesn't live in Woodbridge, and you also have a daughter who lives in
Virginia.
And you're still here.
Karen said it best. I have it written right down here. This was home to us. Besides that, I know I spoke a lot about World War II, but I have with me, if you would like to see it, a photograph of a number of boys who collected scrap metal while they were students at Hope Lawn School. So if you want to take a look at it, come on up. And there's also another picture of a young man selling war bonds, also from Hope Lawn School. So I'm going to put it up here on the table. Anybody wants to see it?
Okay,
But
at the conclusion, they can
Right.
come up, or we can, that would be the best.
But going back to why did we stay in Woodbridge, after a while, Shirley and I built our home here in Ford's. That was in 1963. We still live in the same house. Our children were born here. They were born in Hope Lawn. We lived on Florida Grove Road in Mrs. Posick's house. Our church affiliations were here. And my employment was here. I worked in this area for 43 years. And so I was drafted out of Hope Lawn in 1958 and served 2 years down in Virginia. And so Shirley and I had a wonderful time. Shirley was born and lived in Hope Lawn, in Woodbridge her entire life, born on Fulton Street. So Woodbridge is kind of inbred in us.
Genetic.
Yes.
Can I just say something else?
Pretty much.
The house that I grew up in, I didn't mention this, my mom, on Gordon Avenue, one house away from my grandma's house, my mom bought while my dad was overseas. And she wrote to him and said, that house on Gordon Avenue, and he knew the house. She said, shall I buy it? He said, yeah. And this completely baffles my imagination that my mother bought a house while my dad was overseas. But they were married before he shipped overseas, and he didn't come home for 4.5 years.
Okay, when we're talking overseas, it's World War II.
World War II, I was after World War II. But, you know, that, and I was 8 years old banging floorboards up in our attic when we built our house. So that's why I stayed.
Okay, and Dave?
If I just go back one step, there's some people here I see nodding with some comments that were made by Karen and also by Andy. One thing that was so interesting, the street I lived on, William Street in Ford's, and there was Link Street, Paul Street, Rhine Street. They were all dead-end streets. And right now we're at Green Acres, where they have a nice trail that they put there for people who can jog or ride the bike. Trains used to go through there. And in the year that I grew up, they weren't trains like they have by Amtrak now. They were fueled by coal. And I can remember, you know, not everybody had washer and dryers in their house. My mom had one of those old ringer things, and you put it right through a ringer, and you hang it out. You had a clothesline in your backyard. Well, when that train came through, you know, I can remember it was almost like panic set in because that steam was coming up, cinder in the air, and my mother would say, "Hey, everybody, get out there, get those clothes off the line." And we'd take those things with the clothespins off, and we'd put them in, take them in, because all that remnants from the train would come up, and it would get into all the wet clothes. And in the winter, when my mother was hanging it out, everything was frozen like a board. You end up bringing it in, and you hung it, put it downstairs, and where the heat was, and it all thawed out. That was just something I just wanted to go back on. I wanted to change it. Why did I remain in Woodbridge? I normally don't read something, but I think it's important enough to read it. You know, why I remained in Woodbridge. I have remained in Woodbridge and currently live on High Street, right off Barron Avenue in Woodbridge, since 1968. I love Woodbridge and Woodbridge Township because it's a great place to live. The township has everything a family would want. It is safe, thanks to our mayor and council and police department. We have top-notch facilities and events almost right in the room where you people are sitting. I brought my grandson here for the last 3 years to the train show. I mean, you can't beat that during the holiday period. It's almost too many things to mention in this forum. To sum it up, I mean, there's you have the train station close by. You've got all of the amenities that you would want. You have holiday parades. You have a school system is great with cooperation with the mayor and the Board of Education and with Dr. Zaga. And to this day, I've never entertained any thoughts about moving from Woodbridge. My family and I are fortunate. We have a condo on Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. It's gorgeous. I go down there for 6 or 7 weeks out of the year. I love it down there, but I don't want to live down there. My heart and soul is in Woodbridge because I find it to be very safe. The memories there are great, and it has everything that any family would want to offer. And as long as I'm living and my wife's living, I'm going to still reside at 60 High Street in Woodbridge, New Jersey. It just has too much to offer to leave.
Well, I thank you all for sharing your memories, and we closed on your note, but I think the agreement is with Willie. You've got good memories
Yeah, tremendous.
of Woodbridge, and I think many of you who are in the audience also have shared some of those good memories. We're going to have a question and answer period later, but I want to thank our 3 interviewees for sharing their personal memories. Once again, you could get their interviews, Google it, their name. You could get it there or through the Woodbridge Public Library. And before we conclude, I want to thank the Barron Arts Center for hosting this. I want to thank the Historic Preservation Commission, who are instrumental in helping me with this program. They will provide light refreshments, but Kevin Rossi is a member. Bruce Christensen is a member of the Historic Preservation Commission. But Kevin, if you could come up right now, because for each of the interviewees, we want to give them what the Historic Preservation Commission has accomplished. Come on up. Okay, this is a folder of all the 8 booklets that the Historic Preservation Commission has done on the different sections of Woodbridge. So each of our interviewees get this as a thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Let me just
Thank you very much. Oh, and Bruce.
We just recently for the Green Street area, which was very successful. There are a few individuals here that were on that. Extremely informative. Our next project that we're working on right now is the Franklin Street, Edgar Hill, Richdale corridor, because that's very rich in Woodbridge history as well. So we're not sure what direction we're going to go after that, but the last booklet that was submitted to the State Historical Group won 2nd place in the state competition. We have in the past won 1st place in the state award. So there's a lot of effort and research that goes into each of the booklets.
Mm-hmm. And I thank you for all the research. Now, Dr. Dolores Capraro Joffrey is the head of the Historic Preservation Commission. She couldn't be here today, but she helped with the planning. And we have our docent, Lynn. Raise your hand. Thank you. And we have Cal Lubavitch, who is also a volunteer with the Barron Arts, and she helps prepare the punch that you're going to have in a few minutes, and some cookies from Dorsey's Bakery. But before we conclude, any of you have any questions for any of our panelists up here? Yeah.
Yes, okay. Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
I got the book on the section of Fords, and I can identify some of the places that were in that book and what is there now. In one of those pictures, there's a picture of what was probably an old gas station somewhere on Ford Avenue. Now, I don't know if that building is still there or not. I can identify there was a building the water being pumped out of the basement. So there you can see a number on the building. So I can identify it. I can locate it. But this particular picture of this building at one time was some kind of old type gas station with a pump down front. Can you tell me what is there now?
Gee, I'm not sure you're talking about on Ford
It's
Avenue.
on, no, it's on New Brunswick Avenue.
On the Brunswick Avenue. You're talking about.
New Brunswick Avenue. My mistake.
I think right, you're talking about, if I'm not
New Brunswick
mistaken, a gentleman that had Ford's Taxi Company. The two pumps were right on the sidewalk, and you
Yeah.
pulled up, and that was
Yeah.
unique. The two gas pumps were right
Right.
there on the sidewalk. You pulled right on,
Yeah.
right there by the curb, and it filled in. The man's name, I think, was Lund. He started Ford's Taxi Cab Service, and I think the Senior Citizen Building, the complex. I think there's a Senior Citizen Building that's located there right now.
So that building is gone. I mean, I can identify the.
Right.
I know I moved into Ford in '74.
Right.
Lived over there all my life. Lived on Main Street for 28 years, and so I know where the theater was. I know where what was the theater. It's not
Right.
there. The building's there. It's not there anymore. I can identify Thompson's. I can identify the older pharmacies before RX, farther down the street, like Creel Street, by the old firehouse. But that particular building, I walked that street from end to end, and I couldn't find that building. So now you tell me that it's no longer, there. Now that's the senior citizen, like what, 160 or something, Brunswick Avenue.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, it was down from the Ford's Playhouse Theater,
Yeah.
and it was Mr. Lund on that, and there were two gas pumps right outside on the
Yeah.
sidewalk, and he had a little service area there, which later on he became Ford's Taxi, and I think that was knocked down, and there's, I think, a senior citizen complex that's
Okay,
right
that
there
would
on
be
New
Olson
Brunswick
right
Avenue.
now.
Olson
But-
Tower.
Olson Tower.
Olson Tower.
Okay, because
All right, but the book you're mentioning, the
Yeah.
way you saw the picture was Ford's, and it was written by Joanne Bullock.
I've got the whole collection. I got a book on Woodbridge, a book on Ford, and different stuff. Even got one on
Yeah.
Island. I've got all the collection of books that they have
Good.
that came out as far as from year 1 to number 2 to number 3, number 4, and things that they changed them over the period of time. And one thing that
These were books you paid for, am I
each book
correct?
I paid for, like
Yeah,
$20.
okay, that's the photo journal series on different communities in New Jersey.
The whole thing.
But Joanne Bullock and our Woodbridge Public Library has a copy of it. I have taken the copy out. It is on my desk at home, and I'm sorry I didn't bring it because it would have shown the picture that you were talking
one thing in one of the pictures which shows the freight yard in Port Reading, which the picture underlined it says,
That's Port Reading, though.
well, Port Reading, in Port
Okay.
Reading, but it's in one of the
We're in
books.
Ford's today.
It's one of the books, okay, it's one of the books, underlining, it says, a roundhouse in Port Reading in the freight yard, right? It says
The
Indian
roundhouse. Yeah, but
Roundhouse,
that's-
that is a misprint. That is a misprint. There was no roundhouse. I'm very familiar with that freight yard, and I'm very familiar with trains. And a roundhouse is because it went around
Okay,
a
well,
turntable.
that's another book, and I'm sorry, Vinnie Martino, we had
Yeah.
Port Reading last year, Series 2, and he and you could have discussed that.
Because-
I don't have the railroad background, but I want
But-
to concentrate on Fords right now, because we
But
also
is
have...
that, is that
because-
where, is what I'm saying to you making sense where you're talking about, where I'm talking about with the two gas pumps were out front?
Yeah, I know.
That's
I
pretty
got
much
that,
what
but
it
when
was,
she
right.
mentioned about the books, I just happened to be, it's a little stiffer with me because it's a misprint because there was no roundhouse in that freight yard.
Okay, but that's Port Reading.
That's Port Reading, but I started with them, I know, but I just wanted to make that, if you're talking about those booklets,
Yes.
the 1, 2, 3, 4 booklets.
Oh, there's a series of them.
There's
Okay. Thank
There
you.
they got another copy, and that is included. I wish they would correct that. It's an engine house.
You have to write to the publisher then.
Well, okay.
Okay.
But thank you for the information about the gas station.
That's okay, you're welcome.
Okay, we've got an Erickson that has a question.
Does anybody remember Ford Avenue and New Brunswick Avenue on the corner? The little house that had the big oak tree that was cut down. Right now it's 7-Eleven.
I think we have a picture of it in the office area, and that was in the book that was put out on Ford's as well. That was the Liddell house or something. But when you go into the other room, you'll see your brother with the Erickson truck. We have a picture of it. George, yeah.
He was my milkman.
Okay.
Wasn't the little house down on King George's Road, down on the corner, a big tree?
Yeah.
And then the bank was down there, now there's like a quick check or something, there was a gas station
Go
originally.
into the other room and you're going to see that
Does
picture.
anybody know how Ford's got its name?
I think
No, I don't know.
Where that house, with that big tree that you're talking about,
Yeah.
the Ford family lived there.
Okay.
And people would, from Percy and Boy, we'd talk about this, and they're coming to Ford, to the town which was Ford. Where are you going? We're going out to Ford's Corner. And from that, they gave it the name Ford.
Yes, it was the Ford family. Okay, it's getting a little cold, but so you're cold. We're
No, I
going to
just-
go and get some refreshments now because we have to be out of here by 4 o'clock. So please eat the cookies.